There you are. You're right on screen.
Do you want to unmute?
That Megan? Oh, that's the group.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, right over there on the left.
Whoops, we lost it.
Oh,
there we go.
It is.
But they just froze.
Yeah.
That looks like our tech. Or unless that's Leslie. I can't see her.
Well, it's the speaker we want, isn't it?
Yeah.
The speaker. Oh, Samsung. There we go.
Okay, I guess it's telling them.
Well, he's trying to solve this problem first.
Okay. Perfect.
I'm looking for the remote for the television. The Samsung remote.
Oh, right.
Samsung.
Samsung one.
Oh, you just
Did
had it.
you had it? Is it on the coffee table? Is it in the kitchen?
You had it earlier. I know
Did you walk in the kitchen with it? See, here's up and down. Is that speaker? Right here. You can't read it either. The blind lead the blind.
battery.
You want to without the mic or with the mic? With the mic? Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys for having me tonight. Really appreciate it. Again, my name is Maletzke. I'm a statewide wolf specialist for Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I actually got my bachelor's degree back in Wisconsin. I grew up in Wisconsin and came out to Washington State about 2000. After graduating, I got a master's degree studying lynx in north central Washington and studying cougars in the Cleveland area. I don't know if you folks remember a project called Project Cat, but I worked with Dr. Gary Kohler on that project as a biologist and then later as my PhD dissertation project. And so I ended up getting my PhD at WSU in 2010 and came to work for the department. After that, I did some wolf work as my undergrad. There was a wolf research team and for Wisconsin DNR that I worked on for 3 years in college. And then came out here and I did the habitat mapping. It's in the wolf plan that I'll talk a little bit about. And then some population modeling while I was finished up my PhD. And so the population modeling that's in our wolf plan, I also worked on that as part of a postdoc after I finished my PhD. And then I worked on a black bear project for 5 years up in Leavenworth and Capitol Forest and in the Issaquah area where we're capturing common black bears. And so I spent 5 years trapping bears and put collars on, doing den investigations and some pretty fun stuff in the wintertime, crawling into bear dens. And then decided I had enough of that and thought I'd jump into the wolf arena. There was a position flown for the Statewide Wolf Specialist because I was glutton for punishment. And so I decided to throw my hat in the ring and I got that position in 2017. So I've been doing that for 5 years now. And, so my job for the department is to basically help monitor the population as wolves are recolonizing Washington and then also work with livestock producers and things around the state. But I'll do all the capture and collaring of wolves that we have in the state. I've got a team with 2 other folks that I work with, and the 3 of us do all the field level monitoring of the wolves. And so in the wintertime, I'm capturing, collaring, and doing surveys to find out how many wolves we have in the state. And then in the summertime, I switch over to trapping and collaring wolves that where we don't have to collar in the back. And so I spend about 60% of my time probably doing field work and about 40% doing office type stuff and doing things like this. So it's so nice to actually be in person. I haven't been in an in-person meeting and talk to people face to face for quite some time. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me. So every year we actually will tally the wolf population, look to see all the management actions, the number of wolves that we estimate that we have, all these different metrics we put in an annual report. And so this presentation I have tonight is a kind of a culmination of all that information from 2021. And so up through December 31st, we want to know how many wolves survived through the year that made it to winter, how many pups made it to winter, and then also just a tally of all the other management actions that we did. So that's all found in an annual report that you get online on our website, but it's also, I'll kind of cover a good update of that with this presentation tonight. And so how the mouse works. Well, it was working. Yeah, it was working before. I'm not sure why it's not, but so maybe we just need to. Next one. It's not updating that slide, so maybe I got to go to the slide presentation. This one. There we go. All right, good. Still doesn't work. There it goes. Now I got it. All right, sorry about that. Technical difficulties. So I want to start out. Is that better? Sorry about that. Moving a little further away. So I'd like to start out talking about the listing status of wolves, because that's changed quite a bit over the year. One thing about wolves is there's a lot of people interested, for good or bad, about whether wolves are here or not. And it ends up with a lot of litigation. And over time, we set up, we want to see wolves recover in the state, but wolves are actually statewide endangered. So across the whole state, they're endangered at a state level. But at a federal level, in January of 2021, the wolves have been federally listed in this western 2/3 of Washington, and they were federally delisted in this eastern section because that was part of the Northern Rocky Mountains distinct population segment. So it goes in with Northern Idaho, Wyoming, and Idaho, and they felt that population was recovered, and so they delisted wolves in that eastern 1/3. But the western 2/3 of the state, these two recovery zones, had remained federally listed. That they were actually federally delisted in January 2021. So all of wolf management was under Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife jurisdiction. Up until February 10th, there was another litigation, and a judge in California relisted, looked at the information from the folks that were suing U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they relisted wolves in the western 2/3 of Washington federally. So any of the work that we do, the state still does all the kind of on the ground management of wolves, but anything in the western 2/3, it's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that has jurisdiction. The federal government has jurisdiction of wolves in this western 2/3 right now as of February 10th. And so we're still working towards recovery. We work well with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. In essence, management really didn't change at all with that change in Washington, because they were still state listed anyway in the whole state. But we have a conservation management plan that designates 3 recovery regions that we want to see wolves recover in. And so they're doing really well in the eastern region. They're starting to come back pretty well in the North Cascades. And part of that endangered species is you want to see wolves recover over a significant portion of the range. Hence why we have the 3 recovery regions. And so as soon as we get 4 successful breeding pairs in the South Cascades, Northwest Coast recovery region, we'll start that process towards delisting wolves. And so we'd like to see 4 successful breeding pairs occur in Eastern Washington, at least 4 successful breeding pairs in the North Cascades, and 4 successful breeding pairs in the South Cascades. It'll have 3 successful breeding pairs for 3 years. We can get there in 1 year if we have 6 successful breeding pairs for any 1 year in 4 initial recovery regions. And so, Josh, I don't know what it's doing. I don't know. Apologize. I think this is we're going to get to our recovery goals and be able to start that management as soon as we get 4 successful breeding pairs in the South Cascades, because we'll be at that 18 successful breeding pairs.
And so that question, we're actually in the North Cascades region here in Cascades County, correct? Because it looks like the boundary is Columbia River.
It's actually I-90 there, and so I apologize. Can I just talk loud? Will that work okay? That's very good. Yeah, so anything south of I-90 is in that South Cascades recovery region. So we're hoping that wolves would get south of I-90, and then we would start seeing packs established south of I-90. Once they make it south of I-90 and we get 4 successful breeding pairs south of I-90, then we'll start that recovery or that delisting process in the state. And so in order to get those numbers, how do we figure all that stuff out? And so every winter, myself, there's conflict specialists, there's district biologists, enforcement helps out, and actually reports from the public. We use all that information to figure out where the packs are, where the wolves are on the landscape, and then we go out and count those. And we also use collars. We can go out in summertime, collars on, and then we can go out in the wintertime and actually, once we have a collar in the pack, we can find other members of that pack and collar those wolves. And so I've always tried to explain it in presentations, but we were able to come up with some funds to make a short video to kind of show you guys how we do this work. And so I want to play that video now for you and kind of let you see it's not even video, but it shows you the work that we do in the wintertime to do these surveys.
You guys all set? Yep, I'm good. Good buckles.
A lot of the flying we're doing is it's not anything most people would even conceive of happening.
Right. Right. I don't see it. Right there. Okay, good.
We're flying 10 feet off the ground at 30 miles an hour around trees just to get a chance at maybe darting a single animal.
We virtually had no wolves left in Washington State after 1930. And in the 90s and early 2000s, wolves started to show up in reports occasionally. But in 2008, we were able to confirm our first pack. And then from there, it's been building. So they're coming from British Columbia, they're coming from Idaho, Montana. And part of my job in monitoring the population is seeing where they're recolonizing what parts of Washington. They're showing up and trying to find them as they get here.
We're monitoring wolves a lot of different ways in all these different aspects to answer the same question: how many wolves are there and how is recovery progressing? It might seem simple, but there's a lot going on in that.
Today, we went out on snowmobiles in the Loop Loop Pack territory. We were doing our winter surveys where we try to get a minimum count of a number of wolves in each pack. And so we were looking for tracks and sign of wolves. So that's one of our methods for counting them.
And if you've got a lot of sign activity, we'll throw up a trail camera there and see when they come back through.
And so we do that first. And if we think wolves are in the area and we think it's a pack of wolves and they may have pups, we'll then try to go in and we'll try to collar one of those adult wolves. And the way we do that is by trapping them in the summer. So we'll go in, we'll set these Lego traps just like you can probably imagine, except for they have rubber instead of steel where the teeth are.
And you go out and you check traps and you don't catch anything. You go out and you check more traps and you don't catch anything. It can be incredibly frustrating because wolves are incredibly smart.
And the winter is a whole different thing.
In the wintertime in the pack with a collar, we can go in and put another collar in or switch those collars out with a helicopter. We'll draw the blood and we'll put your tags in, put a microchip in it just like you would microchip a dog. And then we'll collect a tissue sample for DNA and we'll take all kinds of measurements and we'll fasten that collar on. By having a collar in the pack in the wintertime, we're able to go out and use a fixed wing plane and we can circle with the plane, locate where that pack is, and we can actually physically count the number of wolves. 1, 2, there's at least 2 straight now.
A large part of our wolf monitoring has been collar based. So as wolf biologists, we go out and we put radio collars on wolves, and then that information allows us to figure out how many wolves are in packs and kind of what a territory looks like. But as the wolf wolf population grows, we're not able to maintain collars in every pack.
I still have the CPM color, right?
Every time you put a collar on, you're stressing that animal. You're running a risk of injuring or killing the animal. You're running a risk of injuring or killing yourself if you're flying a helicopter.
More and more, the more I do it, the more I realize how dangerous it is. And kind of what we're risking to do this. And then when you really think about what we're getting kind of in return, what kind of data we're getting, that's kind of when we start thinking about, are there other ways to get this data? Do we need to risk as much to do this?
Collars are a tool, but we're looking at cheaper ways and better ways to constantly refine how we're finding wolves on the landscape.
Audio mods are a open source computer chip based listening device. And setting the audio mod is simply just putting this little device in a Ziploc bag and stapling it to a tree. We're just listening to the sounds that are out there, and we're using that to tell us how many wolves are in a landscape. That's never been done before, and it's super exciting. You're listening to wolves howl.
I think we gather a lot of this information because people want to know. For the folks that love to see wolves on the landscape, they want to know. For the folks that have livestock and may not love wolves and may not want to have them on the landscape, they still want to know.
These animals are very normal in a lot of ways. So when I say normal, I'm not meaning like they're boring or anything like that, but that, you know, they have no idea that they're controversial and they're just doing regular wolf stuff every day.
I like to say they're just another critter on the landscape. And they're not near the big bad wolf that everybody makes them out, but they're not a saint either, you know. They're right in the middle. And I just wish folks would understand that a little bit more. So. Some of it can be pretty dangerous, and with it's pretty cold hanging out of the helicopter with no doors at 5 below in the wintertime, 120 miles an hour. It's hard to fit that many clothes on to stay warm, but we get out there, we still try and get the collars out. And we did work this past winter. We were able to put 14 collars out across the state on the helicopter. Last year we caught 17 wolves and 12 different packs in just 2021 alone. We're currently monitoring, actually that number changes because collars, batteries die, wolves disperse out of state. I mean, it's constantly dynamic, but we're up to, I think 38 wolves collared right now in Washington that we're monitoring. So we keep working on that all year long. It's a pretty dynamic thing, but that gives us this information so that we can go out and do these counts on wolves. So if we want to look at where we found wolves in Washington this past winter, we did have 5 new packs. It was actually 4 new packs and 1 that reestablished. This was a pack we had in the past that kind of winked out for a couple of years. This was a new pack, Union, Keller Ridge, Shady Pass is just south of Lake Chelan, right here. And so that's probably the closest one. We had another pack in the Needham in this area, just east of the Piano Lake. That pack I'll get to it, but we had 2 wolves collared in there, and they both decided to disperse back in December, and so I'll show you their paths in a minute. But we still have the Pianoway pack this year, and then we had a new pack called the Columbia pack down the Blue Mountains, along with these other 4 that we had down there. And so we did have 1 wolf in Western Washington, and we had a pack called the Diapsid Creek. It had 2 animals in it back in 2019. It's only been 1 individual the last couple of years that we've been able to find, which doesn't meet our definition of a pack. A pack is 2 wolves traveling together in winter. And then our metric for recovery is successful breeding pairs, which is 2 adults and 2 pups traveling to December 31st every year. So when we talk about successful breeding pairs, that's what we're looking for our recovery goals. To look at numbers, we had 15 successful breeding pairs in the Eastern Recovery region and 163 wolves. We know it's a minimum count, so that means there could be more wolves out there if there's a pack we missed or some individuals on the landscape. So we don't necessarily get them all, but we get a pretty good idea of how many wolves that we have. There's 27 packs in the Eastern Recovery region. In the North Cascades, we had 4 successful breeding pairs, so that means 4 packs had at least 2 pups make it to the December 31st of 2021. And minimum count of 42 and 6, and then 6 packs. And then the South Cascades, we had 1 wolf that we know dispersed to the South Cascades. Since that time, we actually know that there's 2 wolves down the South Cascades that we've been monitoring. One of them's collared, one of them's not. And so we had a total in 2021 for 206 wolves with 19 successful breeding pairs and 33 packs total. And so if we look at the trend over time, this is from 2008 all the way up to 2021. We see a pretty steady climb in the wolf population up to 206 wolves, which is where we're at this past year. We've had a couple of years where it kind of plateaued out, but it's just part of the normal dynamic of the wolf population. We saw, an increase this past year. When we look at successful breeding pairs, we break it down by the recovery regions. So Eastern Recovery regions definitely met its recovery goals. The North Cascades, the last 2 years, we've had 4 successful breeding pairs, which is our minimum recovery. So I think about things, we're probably about 2/3 of the way there towards recovery in Washington for wolves. And so I look at where those successful breeding pairs are, and a lot of them in the Eastern Recovery region, both down the Blues and the Northeast. And then we had 4 successful breeding pairs up here. Our Pianoway pack was not a successful breeding pair. They didn't have at least 2 pups make it. And the Shady Pass pack didn't meet that metric for pups last year. There were 4 wolves in that pack, but we didn't have pups make it from the past summer. So there were a couple adults that made it, but it didn't meet our definition. And then we also monitor mortalities every year. And so this past year, we had one of our highest years of mortality that we were able to document. The Colville Confederated Tribes, or the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, has a hunting season in Northeast Washington on their reservation and on their ceded lands. And so they hunt wolves, as well as the Yakima tribe, or not the Yakima, I'm sorry, the Spokane tribe hunts wolves as well. And so there were 22 legal harvested wolves, 4 vehicle strikes, 2 that were likely poached that we found. And then the department, when we do have interactions with livestock, there's times that we have to go in and remove wolves or potentially remove a pack.
Do the tribes have a quota or a maximum number, or can they just hunt however many they want?
No, they do. They can only hunt on their ceded lands or on the reservation. And then they do have a maximum number. The Colville tribe does. I think the Spokane does as well. I don't have those numbers handy, but I can look them up. They're in the annual report, what that maximum number is. And so, but they still, the Colville, the Confederate tribes of Colville Reservation, they, still had plenty of wolves left on their lands.
So the wolf count that you are.
So it does. So we do work with the tribal biologists, and they give us numbers of what makes it through to December 31st. So all of this harvest occurred in 2021, and we still had 206 wolves make it to the end of the year. And so, and then we tally everything from January through next December will be in 2022's report. And so, you know, they might have a hunting season that goes through the winter, but we kind of stop everything. How many wolves survived to December 31st? And then we start a new tally as of January 1st for the next year. But this, so these mortalities occurred. So that population obviously was higher than 206 because we know we had at least 22 more wolves last year that were died of some sort. So we just keep track of that stuff. When I talk about the dispersals, you know, when we look at recovery and how it's going, there are a lot of folks that talk about translocation. Well, we should just move wolves to the South Cascades. They're having a hard time getting across I-90. You know, I'm like, just be patient. They'll get there. Wolves are incredibly amazing how they can travel across the landscape. And you can see this was a wolf that left the Grouse Flats path, and it went down, I think it was 868 miles as a travel path all the way down into southern Oregon. And that's where its collar battery, or it actually dropped off. The collars have an automatic drop-off function, and that's where that collar timed out and the collar fell off. So we never got to see where it officially went. They picked it up, the Oregon biologist picked it up on camera down there, so we know it hung out somewhere down in this area, but we didn't get to follow its movements with the GPS collar. We had one leak in the Ingham. It swam the Columbia River, went right across the Columbia Basin, swam the Columbia River again, went across the Colville Reservation, swam Lake Roosevelt, and then ended up in the Stranger Pack territory. And all within a matter of like 3 weeks. So that happened last December. It was up in Stranger by January. So it's pretty amazing their ability to cover this landscape. This one left the Needham Pack territory, actually left the Piano settled in this area for about a year, and then it picked up and it went up to Alpental up on the pass, decided it didn't want to cross up there, came down, hung out on Easton Ridge for a little bit, then walked all the way down by Uniontown Hill and bumped into the elk fence for about 3 or 4 days, and then realized they could get around the elk fence closer to the rest stop, came across the highway just down from the rest stop, and then worked its way down, and now it's actually down in this area south of the Yakima Reservation there. And so it's been kind of hanging out. We're kind of watching it localize, and that's where we actually had another wolf with it. So we're monitoring that. It's our first pair of wolves. If they make it to December of this coming year, that'll be our first pack in the South Cascades, but they got to make it to winter in order for us to call a pack. This one left from the Togo Pack territory and ended up in BC. We've had them go, 400, 600 miles into BC. They can cover so much ground. They can swim reservoirs. They can cross highways. I don't have worries that they aren't going to get to the South Cascades, but we need that population in the North Cascades to establish in order to get them to have a source population to populate that South Cascades. So that's why the recovery plan is built like it is. And so if we look at the population summary as a whole, we've seen the population grow since 2008 at about 25% a year. The last couple of years, it's been a little bit lower. The annual growth rate has been about 16% per year. But you can see in 2008, we started at 5, and now in 2021, we're up to 206. We started with 1 pack, and now we're up to 33 packs. We had one to 2 successful breeding pairs at the start. We're up to 19 successful breeding pairs. And then our mortality this year was 30. It was the highest mortality we had. But even with 30 wolves that we knew of that had died this past year, we still had a growth rate of 16%. So a wolf population is actually really pretty robust. And we do monitor interactions with livestock. And so 18% of our wolf packs, so not just wolves, but this is wolf packs, had an interaction with livestock at least one time. But we actually only had 2 packs that had reoccurring depredations. Most of those were one incident in a pack and then nothing the rest of the year. So only 2 packs really had chronic depredations. And if we look at that as a total, there's about 1,100,000 or so live or cattle in the state. And last year we lost 5. We had 5 confirmed mortalities of livestock to wolves with 206 wolves. So For those affected producers, that makes a difference. We did have 17 incidents, so we break it down to confirmed mortalities, probable mortalities, confirmed injuries, probable injuries, and look at that. And totally at 17 investigations or depredations that we could have been confirmed or probable, and most of those were injuries. But statewide, with 206 wolves in the state have 5 mortalities. You hear a lot of hubbub about wolves and livestock in this. When we put it in perspective of the actual numbers, it's not quite as bad as some folks make it out to be. But like I said, for the affected producer, it can be a really tough year, and we try and work with them. And we try and work with it to minimize and keep that number down as low as possible. So that was the Huckleberry. That was for the shields up in the northeast and the Huckleberry back territory. And that's the problem when they start getting into something. And this was private timber, well, it was private industrial timberland that they were grazing on. So it was forested landscape, industrial timber, and they were running sheep up there. And this pack happened to build that chronic behavior of getting these sheep, and it's really tough to stop.
Was it near their
No, I wasn't dealing with the conflict at the time of that year, in 2019, 2017. I know they had wildlife services in the mix of that, and the department, they were trying to figure out a way to stop those depredations from happening.
well, obviously,
Well, he pulled the sheep off of that allotment. Actually, the timber company ended up closing down that allotment because of all the interaction there and kind of the bad press. But, you know, we do run sheep in the Canaway. We work with that producer. We have a collar in that pack. We use what's called a rag box, which is a radio activated guard. And so we have a box that has a siren and sound. And when that collared wolf comes close within quarter mile, half a mile of where those sheep are congregating, there's usually a herder that keeps the sheep fairly congregated. And when that box goes off, he's alerted that, you know, there's a wolf in the area, keeps the dogs vigilant, he keeps the sheep a little more banded together. We've been pretty successful at stopping wolves from interacting with those sheep up there. So we have tools that we can use. Some night penning works, or where you can put a turbo battery out there, it's charged off the battery or solar. You know, and so even in the woods, of course, in landscape, sheep are actually relatively, they can be better to do that because you can kind of keep congregated. With livestock, when they go out on the range, they're usually dispersed grazers. And so those cows and calves are spread across a 20,000 acre pasture and they aren't congregated. So when you have range riders and folks out there monitoring those livestock, sometimes it's hard to see and keep eyes on all those livestock at once. And so we end up with interactions from time to time. But it's still relatively minimal given how many impacts overlap.
With the wolves you have now, how many are from the range?
You know, it's all case lupus, all these wolves walked in. So a lot of our wolves, like U.S. Fish and Wildlife, kind of pulled together genetics of wolves from Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Washington, and Oregon. We actually have more wolves that come across the border from BC, but you can see how those wolves move across the landscape. I mean, the same wolves that are in Washington have always been in that same vicinity. There's no, it's all Canis lupus. There's no, you know, people talk about these giant wolves and the subspecies that are brought in. It's just not the case. I mean, just as the nature goes, if you look at a cougar that's up down in Arizona, a big tom is probably 115, 120 pounds in Arizona. A big tom up here is 160 pounds. If you go north to Alaska, you know, animals get bigger as they get older. That's just the nature of how that works. And, you know, but the wolves at this elevation, whether you go from here to Minnesota, or it's all the same. It's all Canis lupus. There's, you know, we do have, they try to split out the coastal wolves from kind of Rocky Mountain wolves in that team, but, you know, the wolves, you can see from their dispersal. The mountain range doesn't stop a wolf from going.
Yeah, I'm curious if the reintroduce how well they have grown with the natural
Yeah, I mean,
process.
wolves were never excavated from BC. They've always been. So, and the same wolves that were in DC were in Washington, we just haven't killed them all down here. And so it's not a difference in species. Our wolves, these are adult wolves from Washington. Our average male is about 95 pounds. Our average female is about 85 pounds. That's the same across the West. So it's not, you can hold up one of these animals. If I hold a wolf up, you can make it look really big, but these Facebook posts of a 300-pound wolf are BS.
So then, just to clarify what I think his question was, so there really wasn't, it's not like elk in werewolf forest coming from Montana.
Yeah.
The wolves more or less reintroduced themselves from Canada. We didn't, as humans, do anything to put wolves here. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we never moved the wolf in Washington State. We're reintroducing any wolves to state. Every wolf that's coming in here is walking to Washington, not zone, or born in Washington. Yeah, it's I'll see.
I'm from Idaho, and I know they reintroduced wolves into Idaho.
And Yellowstone. That was a reintroduction, and that was U.S. Fish and Wildlife did reintroduce there. And so yes, there are some wolves from Alberta, but like I said, we've actually had wolves walk from Washington all the way to Yellowstone. So that's a long
It's like in Idaho, most people don't know, Idaho has caribou.
right.
Yeah,
So
they've always been there.
Yeah, there's two, and Washington had them, and it's that's one thing we changed the landscape a lot, and here we need more of a mature forest with light in that portion. And we've converted all that to early succession, cut a lot of it, and that has changed the landscape a lot. So Washington didn't have a lot of caribou habitat, and now unfortunately, we pulled those out, and they started a breeding population, supplemental breeding population. And so we don't have caribou in Washington anymore. But you'll hear a lot of times that's because of the wolves and that, but it's because of habitat alteration that drove that population down, and then cougars and wolves and other things when that population is low, but there's white-tailed deer, moose, or elk and other things to eat. It doesn't take much to affect. Once we get under 30 animals on the landscape, which is where that caribou population got, then you get into what's called demographic stochasticity or environmental stochasticity. So if you get a really tough winter or something, that can wipe the population out. And just demographic stochasticity is like if you take a coin and flip it and you do it 30 times, you're going to get spurious results. You might get 25 heads and 5 tails, or you might get 15 and 15. But when you're below 30, it's more spurious than if you got above a sample size of 30. And so, unfortunately, that means if you lose caribou, you're going to lose the population when you're under 30, because little things can have a huge effect on that population. So, kind of getting on a tangent there, but yeah, it's kind of interesting when you look at those population dynamics. So when I look at the number of packs, so we had 32 packs in the state in 2021. We had 6 packs that had interactions with livestock across the state, even though all those other packs, so a good chunk of those other packs actually interact with livestock and overlap livestock. We only had 6 packs that actually were involved in at least one depredation event in 2021. So most of our neighbors are good neighbors, and then we do whatever we can to work in those areas, in this area too, to try and get folks to think about non-lethal tools to keep your livestock safe. There's lots of cool little tools that can work, but also, we put a lot more effort too to try and stop and minimize depredations in these areas where it starts to occur. And we like to work with folks, and times, all the best non-lethal tools in the world, we put them out there and they just don't work. And so sometimes you have to go on and remove a couple wolves to stop those depredations. And so that does happen as well. Our guiding documents, if you want to get more familiar with some of the tools out there and how the agency makes decisions about lethal removal and working with producers, we've got the Wolf Livestock Interactive Protocol. That's on our Department of Fish and Wildlife website. And then we have a lot of information in the Wolf Conservation conservation management plan that was adopted in 2011. That can give you a lot of background about how we manage wolves in the state. We have had some kind of creative solutions. We're working with some producers in Northeast Washington to put VHF ear tags on some of the livestock that go out on some of these big allotments during the summer. Because a lot of times, you know, the dense brush and things and steep terrain, it can be tough to find the calves when they're wandering around. And so that's a way for them to kind of keep closer tabs on their livestock when they're out on the open range. And we're working on designing that radio activated guard box. We have some old styles that don't work super well, but they work enough to function. We're trying to get some new designs in there and nobody builds these. They were all homemade back in the day. And so we're trying to find a place that'll actually build them for us, and so that we can use that tool as a scare device for to help protect livestock. So we have quite a bit of ongoing research looking at the predator prey project that we had up in Northeast Washington, a project up by the Tall Gulch Mule area and up in the Okanagan where we collared white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk. There were moose collared for a little while, cougars and wolves in those areas, and actually coyotes and bobcats. And so there's a whole slew of graduate students at University of Washington that are analyzing the data from all those collars. And we also had camera grids out there with trail cameras to census other animals like black bear and get a census of how the species are using the landscape with those cameras. And so a lot of that research, the field work ended last year, and now they're going to start writing up and publishing that data. And so we'll start to see some of that research start to trickle out here in the next year or two, which is pretty cool. You know, I always like to talk a little bit about things that you can do to help coexist with wolves. You know, some of the bigger things, if you're walking out in the woods, even the Teanaway here has a pack of wolves out there. And if you're out for a walk and you have your dog running around, you know, wolves are territorial, and a dog can be, you know, sign of a intruder in their territory. And so if you can keep that dog, you know, I have voice command over my dog to come back if I call her. She just runs about 30 yards from me. I don't usually worry too much about it because I can kind of corral her if I need to. But if your dog kind of runs off and out of sight and bounces around a lot, it might be good to have a leash with you and just keep it under control. Definitely keep the food sources. This isn't just for wolves, it's for bears, it's for lots of other things. So this time of year, bears are running around, pull your feeders in. You know, the suet ball is a calorie bomb for a bear. And if they start getting into those things, you know, but it brings in deer, it brings in other things. And if the deer are congregating in your yard, a wolf or a cougar has to come in and feed. I mean, that's what they eat. So you're just attracting those animals to your backyard. So trying to avoid feeding deer and elk in your backyard. You know, accompanying your pets. I live up off of North Cleolum Ridge on the east end of that. I take my dogs out at night. I'm always out with them. I don't let them out by themselves. Just because I know I mean, it's like living by a busy highway. I wouldn't let them run out on the highway without me being there. And so I treat them the same way as it's just an animal highway in my backyard. So I treat it the same way as living by that highway. And so I just take them out with me and I stay with them and bring them in. You know, it's good to have a good understanding of carnivore tracks and sign. You know, this is actually a little bit small for a wolf track, but you have claw marks on the end of those toes, 4 toes. They're usually very symmetrical, as opposed to a dog that can be a little sloppy. Dogs can waste a lot of energy. Wolves can't really, they don't want to waste energy. They just are usually lining out, but wolves will use our trails a lot in our roads, and they'll line up down the road for 3 or 4 miles. And so you'll just see a track, and when you look at it, you'll be, holy cow, that's a big dog track. I mean, they look really big when you see them in the dirt. So just understanding that carnivore sign, they're in places you recreate or in your backyard. One of the biggest things for livestock, you know, is where we see a lot of issues is when people dump their dead livestock in the backyard. That is a calling card for every carnivore in the neighborhood. They can smell that from 2 or 3 miles away, catch a breeze and follow it right to your backyard. If you've got other livestock there, that's where we end up with pretty bad interactions. You know, in this area, if you go up Reeser Creek or Schnebly Canyon or Coal Canyon, you see dead horses, you see sheep, you see other things laying off on the side. Those wolves find it. We have power data. They just come beeline right for that dead stuff laying up there. It's not solving problems for the future. It's just going to kind of get those animals used to being around the smell of those livestock and things like that. I think we're creating more problems. So if we clean that stuff up, we actually have, if you want to take it to the landfill, the department will pay for hauling those animals to the livestock, if you have dead livestock or pets or things that you want to get rid of. If you don't have a way to get rid of it, we'll help do that. In Northeast Washington, we actually built a compost facility that folks can bring livestock in and we can compost it at the Sherburne Creek Wildlife Area. Trying to do things to get those animals from, rather than having them dumped on the landscape or having it in someone's backyard, being an attractant that could lure in those animals to your livestock. You know, it's good to have better ways to get rid of that stuff. And then if you do see a wolf or a bear or a cougar, coyote, and it's just standing there, a lot of times, you know, just like a deer will stand there and look at you, but you don't think twice about it. But if a wolf does, people, or a cougar does, people get a little bit up in arms because it's just kind of our evolutionary baggage or whatever you want to call it. You know, we're just used to fear big toothy things. And when you got something with big teeth like that staring at you, you'll probably want to just stand tall, keep eye contact with that animal, make yourself just kind of stand as tall as you can. If you have a backpack or whatever else, you can throw rocks, throw sticks, just break that animal's kind of trance on you, and they'll typically go the other way. Back away slowly, don't break eye contact with it. And, you know, I spent, oh my gosh, probably 6 or 7 years going into kill sites and den sites for cougars and treating and catching and collaring them, go into, you know, wolf kill sites. I go in and use telemetry to go find them, go into rendezvous sites. Wolves are kind of interesting. When they have pups, they'll actually stash them in a den site, or they have a den site originally, but then when the pups are big enough after they get weaned after about 6 weeks, they'll leave them at what's called a rendezvous site. That's usually like a big wet meadow, or could be tall timber and a place like that. Those pups aren't big enough to travel with the pack, so they kind of keep them there, and there's usually maybe a yearling or the breeding female or something that stays with that pup while the other wolves might go on a hunting foray patrol, but they can't move those pups out of there. Those pups are too little to move. So we've had a number of people walk into a site like that, get barked at, or get a bark howl. And it's pretty unnerving. I'm kind of used to it. I don't worry about it because I don't know about behavior, not to really be too worried, but we've had some people pretty spooked by that, and understandably so. But if you get into that situation, if you back away slow and just kind of get out of that area, they aren't going to leave because pups in there. They just want you to go. That's them telling you, hey, my pups are here. I don't want you in this area, so they bark at you. You know, it's an incredibly rare event to come across that, but it has happened, and you know, that's one of those things. But we haven't. There hasn't been an attack on a person in the U.S. So they have had, I think, 2 attacks, one from Alaska, one from Canada, and they have had some where wolves been basically in parks or campsites where they've been getting fed. People have been bit, and things have happened. But for a wild wolf, it's just they don't want to be around people. So. It just has a mind of its own. Anyway, my last slide was questions. So I'd love to take those things.
I'm confused about the eye contact. I thought I was across other times, maybe other animals. You're not supposed to have eye contact.
Yeah, grizzly bears would probably be the only one you probably don't necessarily want to make eye contact. But for black bears, for cougars and wolves, you want to make sure they know you're here. I mean, you don't need to be necessarily stalled at or whatever, but just kind of back away, you can yell, you know, hey cougar, hey bear, you know, just make yourself that presence known, and then just kind of back away out of that scenario. I did have an instance with my dogs 2 years ago. In the spring, I go up to this area where I see lots of wildlife. I look to see wildlife, I can see elk, bears grazing the grass and everything else. And so I've got a Springer Spaniel and a Golden Retriever. And I took them out, and my dogs were running around, in that 30-yard range. And my dog is usually really quiet. She doesn't bark at anything. Well, about 30 yards from me, it was less than that, probably 25 yards from me, she barks and is standing to bark. And I immediately yell to her. And she comes barreling right back to me, and 5 feet behind her was my Golden, and 5 feet behind the Golden was Black Bear. And they were all charging straight at me, and they got about 10 yards from me. And my dogs peeled off down another trail, and the bears started keep coming towards me. And of course, I do everything that I tell people to do, hey bear, hey bear. Bears kind of bluff charge. That's kind of what they do. And work with bears much. I've been bluff charged before, but never been scary with my dogs. And so my dogs kind of led this thing right back to me. I yelled at the bear. The bear gets up, and actually I had normally I have a bear spray with me, but I had a pistol on my, and I pulled it out. And the bear was about 5 feet from me, and I just shot it out into the ground behind me. And the bear comes to a skidding halt about 5 feet from me. And it turns around, and it runs down the hill. And so she's down the hill from me. My dogs are over here. And then I hear something in the brush, and there's a cub up on the hill in the tree. And so now I got the cubs above me, mama below me, and my dogs over here. I call my dogs, and I just kind of get them right up to my side and walk back the trail. And when the cub kind of supermans out of the tree and comes down the hill. Bear spray would have been really effective in that instance. I worked around bears enough. I wasn't necessarily worried that she was going to hit me, and so I didn't shoot at her. I just shot in the ground and make noise. But, it's one of those things where if I would have had my dogs on the leash, I wouldn't have been in that scenario. But having my dogs chase the cub up a tree and that sow got really unhappy, she came carrying back and brought them. So having an animal, a dog, that's for having that control, but also be aware. I've worked around these animals enough. I wasn't really too spooked about it, but, I could see somebody that hasn't done that, and I knew better than to have my dog be running around, but I also, it's one of those kind of experiences. I talk to people about this stuff all the time. It was the first instance where I actually got it. And 5 feet is pretty close. That was. So, but just having those animals under control is a really helpful thing. Having them close by, it's going to solve. I wouldn't have had any instance with that bear that I had my dog on the edge there. So it's just one of those things.
So I have a question about the data, the number of packs. So are the data from Washington typical in that you have about a lot of packs never have successful breeding pair, or just that particular years?
Yeah, I think it changes every year, but about 70% of the packs usually have pups, but then less than that typically make it through the year. So it's interesting.
So they are probably most of them probably are. The pups aren't.
It could be, but there's lots of things. They could lose a breeder, one could get hit by a car. I mean, we don't know all those different sources of mortality. And so if they lose a breeder early on, certainly a breeding female before those pups are 6 weeks old, all those pups are going to die. If a cougar gets there, it could kill pups. If a bear kills pups, pups are just, it's like your puppy running around. They get a little bit of idle bouncing around and they get themselves in trouble.
So these are normal.
Yeah, normal things that you'd expect. And so it's kind of interesting because when you look at the wolf population as a whole, if I were to do a count right now, all the wolves have denned. They breed in February 14th is kind of the center of the breeding season, and pups are born in April or early May. And so all those pups are on the ground right now, and they could have litters of 5 to 7 wolves. It might be 2, but it might be 7. And so we could actually theoretically double our wolf population in May every year. But by the time you get to December, the wolves that are older disperse out of that pack. A lot of those pups die, and 50% of those pups die from other kind of causes. And so that population is at its lowest point every year in January, December. And that's why we do our count in January, December to see how many animals actually have made it through the year and are contributing to that population for the next year.
Some years ago, I think you gave a talk. Was it one pup surviving till New Year's How was successful?
Two.
Yes, two then too, because I thought it was one. I was just wondering if that changed a little bit.
It's always been two.
It's always been two. Okay.
And that was established actually in the Rocky Mountain states. One of them, successful breeding paradise. When they
I understand consider that for accounting purposes, but how much?
So, again, that depends on the time of year. So right now, some of those packs could be 14 or 15, just a few with the pups. But again, by the time they get to fall and the pups get big enough to move around with the pack, a lot of times it'll be half that number. And so by the winter time, when we do counts, our biggest pack that I've seen, I think is 13 that have made it to the winter. Our average pack size is 5.3. So it's right around 5 kilos per pack is our
Is that based on not just that inspiring, but like resources they have?
Yeah, so they want those younger wolves. So a wolf pack is a breeding pair, and they have pups, and so some of those pups will make it through the year, and then some of them will disperse, and then others will see how to race them to the next year. So each pack is really a kind of focused thing. And so the pups from last year, you're going to get into their pups next summer. So some of those will help raise those pups and help get it food, but then they get to be 2 years old or 3 years old, and they want to go breed. And so that's when we see those big dispersion, and they're going to go look for a vacancy or a pack that might accept them, or find meat somewhere.
So do you think that they prefer the upper northeast corner of the state that's populated by humans? Or just the terrain? It looks like that's where the largest number are. It's not just because there's not.
No, there's lots of, I mean, we've got white up here, we've got elk, we've got deer, we've got moose, we've got a whole suite of belongings, plus you have Idaho and Montana. The source population, you have BC as a source population. For any rules that come in the Cascades, you have the 97 rule elevation, and not a great travel path. They can cross it, but they're getting less dispersal across here than the straight out of BC. And so now you only have one direction to travel. Oregon doesn't have a lot of rules, so there, eat north and south Cascade. And so, you've got one way traffic, you've got two-way traffic into the northeast. And North Cascades is pretty much in meters. You've got some stuff there. There's a couple patches of Western, but there's perfectly clear like the year. Then you got on the west side. But the prairie biomass is not quite as good as the other. And you've got a lot of rugged mountains and and so there's places to which that exist in the Northeast, but it's not quite as nice. And once you get to some Cascades, then you get more journey. That was a lot of flying. And so, it'll probably be a little bit better in South Cascades. There's a lot of
More the ones that disperse, or they know that.
it's about 50%. So, on average, the average dispersal distance is about 95 kilometers. The average dispersal distances, but we see 100 miles, and we see about 50 days. There's different than other sheets of clay.
Yeah, because that Brian was saying, he presented. He was saying that the males.
Yeah, we have about 50% of the females that shot very small for a meter, and then half of the females are dispersal. But wolves tend to, I think because of their social nature, or because of more solitary, wolves have a social dynamic, and they want to find pack food and have breeding opportunities, and drive out just as much as they have.
Could you go back to your very first slide?
Sure.
Or after this one?
Let's see if I can stop the show. Let me see if I can start the show again.
So which one? This one? Yeah, my eyesight is as good as it used to be. What are those national parks or what are the things in gray area there?
So this is the Confederate tribes of the Caldwell Reservation, and this is the Spokane tribe.
Right.
And this is the Yakima Nation. This is Mount Rainier, and this is North Cascades National Park.
Oh, okay.
And Olympic National Park.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. All the modeling we've done shows that they do, and just their ability to disperse. I think once they're in the South Cascades, I just want to go to the coast, then I think they can stick across that line. It'll take them a little bit while, you know, I think we'll be at our recovery objectives once we get into the patch of the South Cascades, so we'll be recovered, and then we'll just kind of get more protection from that area. And that's one thing for folks that are interested. Right now, we're actually working on a post-delisting plan before we get to that point. And so we'll be looking for a lot of public input. If you go on our website and just type in the search wolves, and you can get to that page and the wolf page, and we can provide comment to any of the documents for a post-delisting plan. Here at Steps right now. And check out any of those. You can get updates on management. You can get emails with all the updates of the things going on in the state and keep tabs on that stuff. We definitely really appreciate public comment and a lot of input. Actually, and that's what comes down to what the citizens want to come off. So that's why I just want to encourage you. So we've got a wolf advisory group as well. We're just actually applying for folks to join that wolf advisory group. If anybody's interested in helping wolf management and serve on that panel, it's a citizen advisory group that helps us navigate. And right now it's moving into figuring out what that wolf plan is going to look like. What we do is what's the shape of that? How are we going to do stuff and interactions with stuff? Areas around the state where you got some degradation. How about the idea of potentially major vertical ways. Oh, that's a great question. So there is some research that shows that just wolves on the landscape, that there is a high stress. I mean, we've done a lot of breed-out defensive strategies on livestock. So when you put a portion predator on the landscape, then it's moving through those livestock, just the presence of wolves could induce that stress. And so some research has shown that, some research has shown it's kind of elusive angles, but we do pay direct costs to livestock producers. So wolves are definitely on calves or on cows. We pay the financial cost of what that animal will be at typically. And so, but then we also have what's called the indirect costs, and we have a livestock review board that if a livestock producer feels that they have a certain amount of cows that didn't breed that year and that don't have calves, or their weights come in under what they think they should have had, they can put a request into the livestock review board to the department. It's got livestock folks, conservation folks, and folks from the department that review those claims, and they could get a exactly had claims, like $40,000 that people have made to get indirect costs for stuff if they felt like they didn't have those. And so we do, and you see the whole plan, trying we tally up those costs. See what we paid for this year. Gosh, I think it was around 40,000. That was getting indirect, and it was around 10 or 11,000.
Seems like that would be difficult to document for the livestock producers that have to have this without situation.
Yeah, it's one of those real kind of fuzzy areas too, because some producers, their allotments aren't self-facing slope, and in a drought year like we did last year, their livestock may not be late because their forage just to burn off on the good side, and another producer may be on the north slope and has still good forage even though it's kind of drought years. So there's other things that can kind of contribute, but try and put your best faith effort into, working with sports and helping as much as you can. That's what the livestock family lays out. And they try and compare those numbers for people. And they might submit a claim for 25 or 30,000, but that claim can reduce it out because they found this. I'm not sure where that one comes. I'd have to look and see. I don't know off the top of my head. Some of it is like endangered species, license fees. Some of it's general funds. Some of it's I'd have to look at the. I can get that answer if you want to go with the participants. Yeah.
But, again, I come from Idaho. And living in Bozeman. But, seems we run into ranchers and sheep herders who feel they have rights to public land as they choose to turn their critters into it. Does the department have such nice mapping where the wolves can be and keep them out of being in conflict? It seems that if you can turn your animals loose in public land, survival fits.
Yeah, this is something, the department actually manages wildlife, like wildlife areas. So we do allow grazing on certain rules and regulations that the livestock producers are need to abide by. We have, separate pastures that they end up being able to inside or outside companies and move them to a different pasture for that time of year. The Forest Service, our BLM, other entities, we don't control their ability to do that. And, that's the Congress of the Forest Service to adjust those, we try to work with the Forest Service, range, to give them a heads up, we share that information. We actually share data, old data with producers. We have a blackout period from April 15th through April 1st through July 15th, that producers can't see that data because we're dense with sensitive information, which don't always move their hand site. So later on, we do the links, things like that. Problems. So we try not to share during the dense season. It's covered by our policies. But from July 15th all the way through March 31st, we share movement data real time with the livestock producers that have an allotment where the whole territory is. So they can see just like we do where the wolves are, if there's an center for the livestock, they can go check their livestock in that area, some more agricultural, and trying to minimize those interactions. And so that's for the commercial operations. Our pastures are, you know, it's not just for every. So we try and work with those folks to minimize those. You know, we don't have control over the law. We don't have you know, if they're here now and it's national tourists, it's hard to tell actually you can't still up there. They're going to show up there. And so there has been places that we run into that conflict over time, and we try and there's rules and there's livestock on that. So we're going to and try to keep the wolf rules as well, try to keep the number of livestock in your field. You know, honestly, we're not, as a department employee, I technically can't do grades, you know, that it becomes a county animal control issue or a sheriff's issue. You know, we did have, down in the South Cascades, we had an instance where we saw this animal on a trail cage and a cell phone, something big with this canine running down the road. And it looked pretty cool. And so, you know, we monitored it and we put some remote cameras up, but we didn't get any pictures of it. But then all of a sudden, there was folks doing a street survey and found a dead animal down in the creek. So they, you know, so hey, what's this like? And so we went and checked it out and picked it up and sent it to the lab to check out, checked the genetics on it, and it turned out it was neutered and had a microchip in it. So it's not bad one time. And so, you know, it was somebody's hybrid, but you know, so they are out there. I don't think they're super prevalent, but we have had instances where
What's like about somebody.
you know, yeah, I had an instance where there was some kind of wolfy-looking critters getting that this town had. They got the neighbors and the dog next door, and our animal control struggled into was nervous about going in. So I went in to this property, and the gentleman, somebody dropped him off to him, and he just didn't handle it. So we ended up calling a whole hybrid sanctuary, and we were able to do it, but I couldn't handle him by hand. I had to pull him out from under the state underneath the block house. Underneath there. Because I didn't know how these animals were reacting. And, you know, but I had a full book out. We got transported to the sanctuary. So every once in a while we have issues, you know, they said it was a wolf. But, you know, stuff over the game.
We got a question from the chat room. What have been some of the biggest logistical challenges that have been faced with studying wolf populations in the field?
In the field, oh boy. You know, honestly, I think one of the biggest logistical challenges for me is the winter capture effort, because you can see how widespread those packs are, and I've got to get a helicopter to every one of those packs that has a collar in it. And so if we've got 16 packs that range from central Washington, north central to northeast to the Blue Mountains, I've got 3 days to 4 days with a helicopter to get around to all those packs, fly into those packs, guard a wolf, put a collar on it, get to the next pack, fly in, guard a wolf, get to the next pack, and move. And I spend, you know, 4 or 5 days on the road, just bouncing around the state in helicopter, just trying to get these. And you got to do it. It's incredibly expensive. So the helicopter time is about $450 an hour to ferry, and it's about $1,500 an hour to fly when we're actually doing captures. Actually, flying through the trees. And so logistically, that can be really challenging. You know, but on average, collar on a wolf, it costs about $10,000 to $12,000 a wolf to put a collar on. And do that work. It's not cheap, it's not easy to do, and that doesn't matter if we're trapping or using helicopter or whatever. And so it can be really challenging. And, you know, we try and be as effective and efficient as we could. Last year we flew 7 days and all 14 wolves. And that was a record. You know, worked out to be about $4,000 around the state. And we had to do together. So yeah, you can see from the video, sometimes they're better and pretty tough. And I've been in snowstorms, I've been in fog, I've been in all kinds of stuff. And we work up a wolf. And this last winter, I was up on top of the ridge at a nice big expanse, but there was a cloud bank around the edge of the woods, and we were up on this high ridge. And I darted a wolf, and it ran straight off the end of the ridge and dipped down the hillside. I was in fog. And so, you know, once I put a dart in a wolf, I'm committed, I have to go. And so the helicopter pilot came in, I jumped out of the helicopter, I had a radio on, backpack with all that stuff to work up the wolf. And I go running down the hill, and the helicopter is foggy, the helicopter shoots up above the clouds and goes back to their base to get fuel. And I'm down under the clouds in the fog, and I tracked the wolf for probably about a mile, maybe 2 miles, dropped about 800 feet in elevation, 8,000 feet in elevation, up this straight edge, and you know, by that time I heard the helicopter pilot up above the clouds. I couldn't see him. I radioed my location. He was able to fly to the river and come up underneath that cloud bank and come into a little hillside where the trees were just wide enough to put the blades in, and I could come back to the helicopter and shoot it. So, you know, it can be pretty lively. It can be really challenging, very physically demanding, but it's fun work. I enjoy it. It's adrenaline pumping, and it's just cool stuff. It's cool country, but it's definitely the challenge. The temperatures themselves. You're flying at 120 miles an hour, it could be as low as 5 below, and then you get out of the helicopter and you have to run to go try and get to this floor, or get through the steep slope and slow through it with all this weight and gear and clothes on, and you start sweating and you get back in the helicopter and pretty low. So I mean, it's you know, but after a certain time, you get used to that stuff. You hope for good weather. You try to plan for the best weather you get, but Mother Nature throws a lot at us. So you just grin and bear it and give it a smile.
You're the actual marksman who shoots darts at the.
Yeah, so there's 3 of us that do the wolf work, and so we go in, and we've got all 3 of us now trained up that any one of us, we can switch out, thank goodness, because it's a little bit warmer sitting in the mugger seat, which is inside the helicopter. It's not a lot warmer because we don't get any heat from there, but when you're in the door, the wind is blowing it pretty hard, and so it's really nice to be able to swap out to go in from one pack to the next. It's like, hey, can you take the door this time, and you go, and so you get a chance to warm up. But the pilot does all of them, but he has a little bit more of a shield to the wind than we do. But the pilot goes without the door as well, so we're all cool. And you want a really good pilot. Our pilot that was in the video here was a Vietnam veteran, and just retired from a year and a half ago. But he was 79 the last time we went out when we were doing the academies. We could fly a helicopter like an extension thing. Just amazing things with that. But the new pilot we have is now a little bit younger than I am, but it's a new one. We always use the same person that we know about in their hands. Washington, if you want to check them out, there's some brochures up here if you'd like them as well.